The old Brahmin families of Boston believe it takes 3 generations to build a legacy. My daughter's fiancé, Preston Whitehall III, certainly thought so. He saw me as just a contractor that knew money building his world. What he didn't realize is that 30 years of honest work doesn't just build skyscrapers, it builds a trap he'd never see coming. You know what's funny about rich people? They never see the trap until it's too late. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The air in my Boston home, a place I had built with my own 2 hands, grew cold the moment Preston Whitehall III walked in. He moved through the living room not like a guest, but like an appraiser, his eyes scanning the photos on the mantel, the architectural awards on the walls, the very bones of the house. He was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he held a glass of my best single malt scotch as if it were merely adequate. "Quite a collection you have, Arthur," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. He gestured with his glass toward a photo of me and my crew breaking ground on the new seaport tower. "Very homespun." My daughter Clara shifted beside him, her smile tight. She was trying so hard to bridge the gap between our 2 worlds, the one I had built from granite and steel, and the one he had inherited through a birth certificate. "Preston is a great admirer of architecture, Dad." "Of course," Preston said, his gaze drifting past the photo and landing on the wedding binder sitting on the coffee table. "Speaking of which, darling, we must finalize the guest list. A wedding is about the merging of 2 great families, after all. It's crucial we get the optics right." He sat down, flipping through the pages Clara had so carefully organized. He paused on the list of names I had provided. 50 names, men who had stood by me for 30 years. Men who had taught me the business, vouched for me at banks, and worked beside me in the freezing Boston winters. My family. Preston tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the name of my foreman, Mike O'Malley. "Clara, darling, are we sure about this? We need to think about who will be comfortable in the room. This isn't a union meeting." I said nothing. I just watched my daughter's face flush with a color that was part embarrassment, part shame. She began to stammer an explanation, but Preston had already moved on, his red pen striking through name after name. Tony Gallo, gone. The Sullivan brothers, gone. The final insult came when he turned to the seating chart. He searched for my name for a moment before finding it. "Ah, here we are," he said, pointing to a small circle in the far corner of the ballroom diagram. "Table 18. Right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen." "It's just for logistics, Arthur," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The front tables are reserved for immediate family and, well, for key business contacts. You understand?" "Oh." I looked at this boy who had never built anything in his life, who stood in a home paid for by the sweat of the very men he had just crossed off a list, and I smiled. I held that smile. It was a mask I had perfected over 30 years in a tough business. It was the smile I gave to city inspectors who thought they could be bought, and to rivals who thought they could break me. It was a smile that promised nothing but delivered everything. Preston, in his blissful arrogance, saw only the calm surface. He didn't see the gears turning behind my eyes, the calculations being made, the dominoes being lined up in my mind. Clara saw it, though. I saw her glance at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. She had seen that smile before, the night a competitor tried to sabotage our biggest project. That man's company was bankrupt within 6 months. She knew this quiet was more dangerous than any shout. "Well, that's all settled then," Preston said, snapping the wedding binder shut with an air of finality. He stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. "Darling, your father has been most accommodating." He didn't understand that in my world, accommodation was a currency. You spent it to buy something far more valuable later on. Right now, I was buying rope, enough for him to hang himself with. I stood and extended my hand. "Anything for my daughter's happiness, Preston," I said, my voice even. His handshake was weak, the grip of a man who had never held a tool heavier than a fountain pen. As Clara walked him to the door, I glanced at the photo on the mantel. It was of my late wife, Maria. We were standing on the dirt lot that would one day become our first home. We were young, broke, but we had a blueprint and a shared dream. Maria would have seen right through Preston in a heartbeat. She would have called him a man of straw, all polish on the outside and hollow within. I could almost hear her voice in my ear. Arturo, do what you must. Clara returned to the living room, her face pale. Dad, about the seating chart. I'm so sorry. Preston's mother can be very particular. It's logistics, Clara, I said, echoing Preston's pathetic excuse. I understand. She knew I didn't. I can talk to him, she offered weakly. I can make him change it. I put a hand on her shoulder. No, let it be. It's your wedding. The important thing is that you're happy. I needed her to believe that for now. I needed her to stay out of the storm that was coming. This wasn't her fight. It was mine. She gave me a worried look but nodded. As she headed upstairs, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike O'Malley, my foreman. Heard about the wedding list, boss. Don't you worry about us. We're with you no matter what. These were the men Preston deemed unimportant. Men whose loyalty I wouldn't trade for all the Whitehall money in Boston. The front door opened again. It was Preston, holding up his car keys. Forgot these, he said with a chuckle. He walked over to me, clapping me on the shoulder with a familiarity he had not earned. Don't worry, Arthur. We'll make a gentleman out of you yet. And with those words, he walked out of my house for the last time as a man with a future. The sun was just rising over Boston Harbor, casting long shadows from the cranes that dotted the skyline of the Seaport District. My office, on the top floor of a building my own company had erected, was quiet. This was my element. Not the stuffy, inherited parlors of Beacon Hill, but a space built of glass and steel, overlooking a city I had helped shape. Last night's insults felt like a distant echo here, a bad dream. But the resolve it had forged in me was as solid as the foundations beneath my feet. I bypassed my usual morning routine of reviewing blueprints, and instead pulled up a private contact on my phone. David Chen. We had met 30 years ago when he was a young lawyer with a briefcase full of ambition, and I was a contractor with a pickup truck and a toolbox. I had built his first office. He had structured my first major business loan. We had built our empires together side by side. He picked up on the second ring, his voice already sharp and alert. Arthur, it's early, even for you. David, I need your counsel, I said, getting straight to the point. It's about Clara's fiancé, Preston Whitehall. I could hear the rustle of papers on his end as he gave me his full attention. I recounted the events of the previous evening, not with anger, but with the dispassionate clarity of a man presenting a case. I described the arrogance, the dismissal of my friends, the seating chart. David was silent for a moment. Art, the man is a privileged fool, no question. But are you sure you want to escalate this? An insult is one thing, but stirring the pot with a Whitehall could get messy. Their family has roots in this city deeper than the subway tunnels. This isn't about a pot being stirred, David, I said, my voice low. My gut is screaming at me. A man this desperate to marry into my company's finances. A man with this much contempt for the people who built it. He's hiding something. This isn't just arrogance. It's fear. Fear of what? That's what I'm paying to find out, I replied. I need your guy. The best one. The one who found that ghost account for the councilman last year. There was another pause. I knew what David was thinking. This was a dangerous game. But he also knew me. He knew that once my mind was set, there was no turning back. All right, Art, he said, his tone shifting from cautious friend to sharp-witted lawyer. I'll make the call. But be careful. You're not just poking a wasp nest. You're poking a nest that has been in the same tree for 4 generations. They have powerful friends. So do I, David, I said, looking out at the city skyline. So do I. He told me the investigator would be in touch within the hour. After I hung up, I swiveled my chair to face the wall behind my desk. It was covered in framed photographs, not of celebrities or politicians, but of every single project Sterling Construction had ever completed. 847 buildings. Each one a relationship, each one a promise kept. Preston Whitehall thought my power was in my bank account. He was about to find out it was in the phone calls I could make, and I was just getting started. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a notification pinged on my encrypted messenger app, a message from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Morgan, preliminary findings attached. M. M stood for Marcus, the best investigator in the city, a man who could find a shadow in the dark. I opened the file. The first page was a photograph. Preston, looking haggard and desperate under the harsh fluorescent lights of a casino, sitting at a high-stakes poker table in Atlantic City. He was surrounded by men who looked like they broke legs for a living. The date stamp was from 2 weeks ago. The next pages were financial summaries, credit card statements, bank transfers, casino markers. The total was staggering. Over $400,000 in gambling debts. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was bad. It explained his desperation for money, his eagerness to get his hands on my daughter's future inheritance. A man with this kind of problem was dangerous and unpredictable, but I still thought this was about a reckless fool who had gotten in over his head. I was wrong. It was so much worse. Another ping. A second file from Marcus. Deeper currents here, Arthur. This is what you were really looking for. I opened the second report. It wasn't about gambling. It was a 47-page document, a leaked internal summary of a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation. Case file number 78B914. Subject: Palmer Investment Group. Primary person of interest: Preston Whitehall III. My blood ran cold as I read. Misappropriation of client funds. Wire fraud. Securities violations. The numbers were sickening. $2.3 million, moved through a series of shell accounts and offshore transfers. And then I saw the names of the victims. Margaret Hoffman, 82 years old. Her entire retirement fund, $180,000, transferred to a personal trading account Preston used, then lost in a single week. Robert and Susan Chen, both in their 70s. Their grandson's college fund, $250,000, vanished. 12 families. 12 lives ruined, nest eggs shattered, futures stolen. Also, this boy in his $1,000 suit could chase his losses at the poker table. The disgust I felt was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth. This wasn't a fool. This was a predator. He had preyed on the old, the trusting, the vulnerable, the very people a man of honor is sworn to protect. I scrolled to the final page, a timeline of the federal investigation. It had been going on for 8 months. They had everything: bank records, witness statements, a mountain of evidence. And then I saw it. The final entry. Coordinated FBI raid and arrest scheduled for 9, Monday, September 29th. The date hit me like a physical blow. The Monday morning right after the wedding. I leaned back in my chair, the entire ugly picture snapping into focus with horrifying clarity. The wedding wasn't just a social event. The marriage wasn't about love or status. It was his exit strategy. His last, desperate attempt to merge his failing criminal enterprise with my clean, successful one. He planned to use my daughter, my name, and my money as a shield and a lifeline before the federal government dragged him under. He thought he was marrying a rich man's daughter to solve his problems. He had no idea he had just tried to build his escape hatch on top of his own executioner's block. Preston's perfectly ordered world was now officially in chaos, but I was just getting warmed up. My third call was to the caterer, an upscale company whose owner, Bill Patterson, I had personally helped secure a lease for in a building I owned when he was just starting out. I didn't have to say much. "Bill, it's Arthur. The Whitehall wedding. I need you to have a sudden staffing crisis." A long pause. Then, "For you, Art? We just had half our chefs call in sick. A terrible shame." The florist followed. Then the limousine service, whose fleet of cars I had financed a decade ago. Each call was a gentle pull on a thread I had spent 30 years weaving into the fabric of the city. By mid-afternoon, Preston's wedding wasn't just crippled. It was annihilated. Every top-tier vendor in Boston was suddenly, inexplicably, unavailable. The inevitable call from my daughter came at 3 p.m. Her name flashed on my screen, and I took a deep breath before answering, schooling my voice into a calm, fatherly tone. "Dad?" Her voice was thin, trembling on the edge of tears. "Dad, something terrible is happening." "What is it, honey? Slow down." "It's the wedding. It's gone. The caterer just canceled. So did the florist. 7 vendors in the last 2 hours. They all have different excuses: staffing, equipment failure, family emergencies. But it can't be a coincidence. It just can't." I could hear Preston shouting in the background, his voice a furious, muffled roar. He was losing control, and his polished mask was cracking. "That does seem unusual, sweetheart," I said, my voice dripping with understatement. "Unusual? Dad, it's a disaster. Preston he's freaking out. He's calling everyone, his father, his business partners. He's convinced someone is deliberately targeting him, trying to ruin him." She took a shaky breath. "He thinks someone is sabotaging us." I remained silent, letting her words fill the space. "Dad?" she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Austin asked me something. He asked about you. He wanted to know if you had connections to these people, these venues." This was the moment. The first test. "What did you tell him, Clara?" I asked gently. "I told him of course not," she said almost defensively. "I told him you were just a construction contractor, that you build things. You don't do things like this. Just a construction contractor." Even my own daughter, the person I loved most in the world, had bought into Preston's narrative of my life. She saw the buildings, but she didn't see the bonds that held them together. "Clara, let me ask you something," I said, my tone shifting slightly. "In 30 years, how many people do you think Morgan Construction has done business with? How many families have we employed? How many favors have we done when someone was in a tight spot, with no expectation of anything in return?" Silence on her end. "When you build someone's dream, sweetheart, they remember," I continued. "When you save their project, solve their problems, deliver on time and under budget, they remember. Maybe your fiancé doesn't understand what 30 years of honest work actually builds." I could hear her soft intake of breath. The seed of doubt had been planted. "Dad," she finally whispered, her voice full of a new, dawning uncertainty. "What are you saying?" Before I could answer, her voice changed again, becoming more direct, more fearful. "Preston is right, isn't he? This is you. You wouldn't know anything about this, would you, Dad?" I left her question hanging in the air, offering only a quiet, "I love you, sweetheart," before ending the call. The seed was planted. Now, I just had to wait for the inevitable storm to make landfall. It happened at 5:15 p.m. My secretary's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp with alarm. "Mr. Morgan, there's a Mr. Whitehall here to see you. He won't wait." The door to my office flew open before I could even reply. Preston stood there, his designer suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The polished mask of the Beacon Hill aristocrat was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a cornered animal. Dark circles hung under his eyes. This was a man who had been through a shredder. "You?" he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. He strode into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. "You did this." I remained seated behind my large oak desk, the very picture of calm. I gestured to the leather chair opposite me. "Have a seat, Preston." "I'm not sitting," he spat, pacing in front of my desk like a caged tiger. "You've spent the entire day systematically destroying my wedding, my life. You've been calling people, using your dirty connections, to shut down every respectable venue in this county." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Preston, I must confess I'm confused. Just last night, you were explaining to me in painstaking detail that I was just a lucky contractor, a man from the trades who didn't understand the language of real power. You said I needed to stay in my lane." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Today, you're crediting me with the influence to control every high-end establishment in Boston. So, which is it? Am I an unimportant tradesman, or am I the man pulling all the strings?" He stopped pacing, his eyes wide with fury. He was caught in the trap of his own logic, and he knew it. "This isn't a game, old man." "It's not," I agreed, my voice hardening slightly. "So, tell me, how could someone like me, a man with unrefined new money, possibly have the connections to affect the plans of a Whitehall? According to you, your family has shaped this community for 4 generations. Surely your influence outweighs that of a simple builder." He ran a hand through his already messy hair, his confidence visibly crumbling. The foundations of his world, his name, his inherited status were failing him, and the terror was dawning on his face. He had come here expecting to intimidate me, to bully a simple man into submission. He had found something else entirely. He had walked into the lion's den, and found the lion waiting patiently behind the desk. His anger finally broke, replaced by a sliver of desperate, raw negotiation. He leaned over my desk, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What do you want?" There it was. The question that proved he finally understood. He finally saw who held the real power. It wasn't the man with the oldest name. It was the man who had built the city they were standing in. I looked at the terrified man standing before me, a hollowed-out shell of the aristocrat who had walked in minutes earlier. His question, "What do you want?" hung in the air, pathetic and small. "What do I want?" I repeated, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of cold steel. "I want you to have exactly the wedding you deserve, son. Exactly the one that reflects who you truly are." His eyes narrowed, confused. "Meaning what?" "Meaning a man who builds his life on other people's money while hiding his own crimes probably shouldn't be throwing elaborate parties." I saw the last bit of color drain from his face. He understood. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the manila folder from the investigator. I slid it across the polished oak. It landed with a soft, final thud. "That's right, Preston," I said, my voice as cold and unforgiving as a Boston winter. I know about Palmer Investment Group. I know about the secret SEC investigation. I know about your $400,000 gambling debt to Atlantic City casinos." He stared at the folder, paralyzed, unable to touch it. "I know about Margaret Hoffman," I continued, my voice low and cutting. 80, 2 years old. You took her life savings, told her it was a high-yield investment, and wired it straight to a casino in Vegas. You can't prove anything," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I know about Robert and Susan Chen," I went on, ignoring him. "Married 50 years, their grandson's college fund, $240,000, gone. Spent on blackjack tables while they eat pasta every night to save a little money. 12 families, Preston. 12 lives you shattered so you could pretend to be a king." He finally sank into the chair, his body deflating as if his strings had been cut. The fight was gone, replaced by the vacant terror of a man looking at the abyss. "How?" he whispered. "You spent weeks telling me about your important people, Preston. I just spent a few hours talking to mine." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "And here's the best part. I know about Monday. I know the FBI has a date with you at 9 a.m. I know they have a file even thicker than this one. I know your assets will be frozen, your reputation destroyed, and your family name will be synonymous with financial crime for a generation." He looked up, a wild, desperate flicker in his eyes. He was thinking about running. I could see it. "But don't worry about Monday," I said, standing up to signal the end of our conversation. "Worry about tomorrow. Because tomorrow, 150 guests are going to arrive for your wedding, and they're all going to discover that the man who spent months judging everyone else's worth has none of his own." I walked to the door and held it open. "Now get out of my building." I had expected him to run. I had expected a desperate attempt to flee the country, or perhaps a tearful confession to his father. What I hadn't expected was for him to double down on the very arrogance that had been his undoing. The call came from Clara at 10:30 on Saturday morning. Her voice was brittle with anxiety. "Dad, have you seen it? Have you seen Preston's Instagram?" I pulled up the app on my laptop. There it was, posted 30 minutes earlier and already spreading like wildfire. It was a video. Preston was sitting in what was clearly his family's study in Beacon Hill. The staging was perfect, a fireplace crackled behind him. Leather-bound books lined the shelves, and a tastefully framed family crest hung on the wall. He wore a cashmere sweater, and an expression of deep, sincere sorrow. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "My friends," he began, his voice heavy with feigned emotion, "I need to address some disturbing developments regarding my wedding today. It has come to my attention that certain individuals, threatened by our family's long-standing legacy in this community, have chosen to use unethical business practices to interfere with a private family celebration." He never mentioned my name. He didn't have to. "Intimidation and business coercion will not be tolerated," he continued, looking directly into the camera. "The Whitehall family has served Boston for 4 generations. We will not be bullied by those who mistake new money for class." New money for class. He was actually using my own daughter's wedding, a wedding he had tried to turn into an escape hatch for his crimes, as a platform for his social prejudices. The comments were already flooding in. I saw names I recognized, other old Boston families, socialites, board members of the city's most exclusive clubs. Disgraceful tactics, Preston. We stand with you. The Whitehalls are the bedrock of this city. This is what happens when you let just anyone buy their way into society. They were circling the wagons, protecting their own without even asking for the facts. Clara was crying softly on the phone. Dad, they're sharing it, his friends, his mother. They're saying terrible things. They're saying you're just jealous of established American families. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Senator Morrison, a man who had attended 3 of my company's ribbon-cutting ceremonies and praised Morgan Construction's contributions to the local economy, had liked the post. Preston was a criminal, a predator who robbed the elderly. But he was their criminal. He had the right name, the right pedigree, the right address. And in their world, that was a shield that could deflect almost anything. For a moment, watching the wave of entrenched support swell around him, I understood the true nature of the fortress I was attacking. Preston wasn't just a man. He was an institution, and the institution was fighting back. I watched the likes and supportive comments pile up on Preston's video for a full 10 minutes. I saw the institutional power of old Boston closing ranks, creating a wall of privilege around him. A younger, more reckless man might have responded with anger, might have made a video of his own, slinging mud in a public fight he was destined to lose. But I didn't build an empire by fighting on my enemy's terms. I built it by changing the battlefield. I closed the Instagram app. I didn't need a film crew or a cashmere sweater. I had something far more powerful, the truth. At 11:45 a.m., I made my own social media post. It wasn't a video. It was just text, simple and direct, posted to my company's professional networking page. To the Boston community, it began. This morning, Preston Whitehall III spoke about class and legacy. I believe those words have meaning. Before you offer your support, you should know that federal agents are scheduled to arrest Mr. Whitehall on Monday for embezzling $2.3 million from the retirement accounts of at least 12 elderly clients. Before you judge new money versus old money, ask yourself which values include stealing from grandparents to fund a gambling addiction. And then I attached a single file, just one, a scanned copy of a bank record. It showed the $180,000 transfer from the account of Mrs. Margaret Hoffman, age 82, directly into an account linked to Preston's line of credit at an Atlantic City casino. For a few minutes, there was silence. Then, the internet exploded. The first person to share my post was Robert Chen's son, a local doctor. He added his own comment. This man destroyed my family's future for poker chips. My parents saved every dollar for 73 years to give my son a better life. Preston Whitehall stole my son's Harvard dreams for a blackjack table. A few minutes later, Margaret Hoffman's daughter posted, My mother died, believing her retirement was secure. Preston Whitehall spent her life savings at casinos while I struggled to pay her medical bills. He is a monster. Then another came forward, and another, and another. The wall of old money support around Preston began to crumble. The comment sections on his video flipped. Wait, my grandfather used Palmer Investments. Can this be true? The Chens are our neighbors? Thief! Give them their money back. Senator Morrison quietly unliked the video. Several prominent families deleted their supportive comments. The narrative didn't just change, it was shattered. The story was no longer about a clash of social classes. It was about a criminal and his victims. My phone rang. It was David Chen. Arthur, what have you done? He asked, a note of awe in his voice. The U.S. Attorney's Office is getting flooded with calls. The FBI is worried he's a flight risk now that this is all public. Good, I said. Good, Arthur. They're moving up the timeline. They're going to get a warrant. They're going to his house. Today. I looked out the window. The trap was set. Now the people, the real, honest, hard-working people he had preyed on, were about to spring it. The news of the FBI raid on the Whitehall estate broke around 2 p.m. It was the lead story on every local news channel. Choppers hovered over the pristine Beacon Hill mansion. An hour later, my daughter stood in my doorway. She wasn't crying. She was beyond that. Her face was a pale, numb mask of shock. Her phone was clutched in her hand, the screen still showing the toxic wasteland of Preston's comment section. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain that tore at my heart. "I saw what you did," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw what everyone is saying. You ruined him. You ruined everything." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply walked to the kitchen table, where the investigator's manila folder still sat, and pulled out a chair for her. "Sit down, Clara." "I don't want to sit down," she said, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. "I want to understand why you had to be so cruel. You could have just told me. Why did you have to destroy him in front of the whole world?" "Because he wasn't just lying to you, Clara," I said softly. "He was lying to the whole world. And sometimes, the only way to fight a public lie is with a public truth." I gestured to the chair again. "Please, before you say anything else, just do me one favor. Read their stories." I slid the folder across the table. Her eyes were wary, but she slowly sat down and opened it. I poured her a glass of water, and then stood by the window, giving her space, my back to her as I watched the news vans still camped out down the street. For a long time, the only sound in the kitchen was the soft rustle of paper. I heard her sharp intake of breath as she read the first victim's testimony. A few minutes later, a choked sob. Then another. She wasn't just reading financial statements. She was reading the stories of lives that had been shattered. I could feel her world, the fairy tale world Preston had built for her, crumbling to dust with every page she turned. After nearly half an hour, she spoke. Her voice was different. The hysteria was gone, replaced by a deep, trembling shame. "Mary Rodriguez," she whispered, reading a name from one of the pages. "She used to babysit me. You remember, Dad? She lost her house." "I remember," I said, still looking out the window. "All this time," she said, her voice thick with self-recrimination. "All these months, I let him make me feel like we weren't good enough. That you weren't good enough. I was so desperate to belong in his world that I forgot how wonderful ours is." She finally looked up from the pages. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I turned and walked back to the table, taking her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You fell in love with a story. It's not your fault the story was a lie." She shook her head, a new fire entering her eyes. A fire I recognized. It was my own. "No, I ignored the red flags, and now I have to make it right." She stood up, her back straight. "The guests are still coming, Dad. They're all on their way to Boston. The gathering is still happening." I looked at her, confused. "Honey, the wedding is over." "I know," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The wedding is over, but the gathering is just beginning. They all deserve to know the truth. From me." By 4 p.m., my backyard was filled with the quiet, nervous energy of 150 people who knew they were walking into a story, but had no idea how it would end. The caterers I had hired that afternoon, friends who owed me a favor, served drinks, but few people were celebrating. They stood in tense, quiet groups on the manicured lawn overlooking Boston Harbor, whispering and glancing at their phones, where the news of Preston's arrest was still the top story. The division was clear. On one side of the patio, near the house, stood what was left of the Whitehall contingent. Preston's father looked like a thundercloud, his face grim. His mother, Margaret, surveyed my home with an expression of pure venom. Their friends, the judges and senators, and old money associates, looked deeply uncomfortable, like they had been summoned to a crime scene. On the other side of the yard, near the old oak tree, stood my people, my crew. Mike O'Malley, Tony Gallo, and the rest of the guys from the company, all looking awkward but resolute in their borrowed suits. My lawyer, David Chen, stood with them, a calm anchor in a turbulent sea. They weren't whispering. They were watching, a silent wall of loyalty. I watched it all from the kitchen window, a strange sense of peace settling over me. This was no longer my fight to command. I had built the stage, but the final act belonged to my daughter. At precisely 4:30 she appeared. She walked out of the house, not through a side door, but through the main patio entrance, parting the crowd like a queen. She was still wearing her wedding dress. It was a stunning, Simple gown, but she had taken off the veil. Her hair was down, and her eyes were clear and fiercely bright. She didn't look like a heartbroken bride. She looked like a warrior. She walked to the small podium and microphone we had set up for the wedding toasts. The murmuring of the crowd died down until the only sound was the gentle lapping of the harbor against the seawall. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the lawn. "Thank you all for coming. I know you're confused. You came here for a wedding, and I promise you, before you leave, you will witness a union between a lie and its consequences." A gasp went through the Whitehall section of the crowd. Preston's mother looked like she might faint. "This morning," Clara continued, her eyes sweeping over the guests, "I learned something about the man I was supposed to marry. Something that changed everything. Just as she spoke those words, a black Mercedes tore up the long driveway, screeching to a halt on the gravel. The driver's door flew open. Preston stepped out. He was out on emergency bail, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours in federal processing. His face was a haggard mask of fury and desperation. He had probably paid his $500,000 bond with money that belonged to his victims. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice raw as he pushed his way through the stunned crowd. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Preston reached the edge of the patio, his lawyer trailing behind him, whispering urgently in his ear. He ignored him. His wild eyes were locked on Clara. "This is a private family matter," he snarled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't need to do this. You're hysterical. The stress of the wedding." Clara didn't flinch. She looked down at him from the podium, not with anger, but with a kind of sad pity. "There were no wedding problems, Preston. There was only you." Her voice was like a steel blade wrapped in velvet. "My father canceled every booking. He did it because he discovered what you really are." Every head in the yard turned toward me. I had been standing quietly by the kitchen door, but now I stepped forward, the manila folder in my hand. "Margaret Hoffman," I said, my voice carrying across the silent crowd. I held up a bank statement from the folder. 82 years old. She trusted this man with her retirement account. He stole $180,000 from her for a weekend in Vegas. Preston's lawyer grabbed his arm. "Don't say anything," he muttered. Margaret Whitehall, Preston's mother, stood up, her face a mask of outrage. "This is slander! How dare you!" "Robert and Susan Chen," I continued, holding up another document. "Married 50 years. Their grandson's college fund $240,000. Gone. Spent on blackjack tables while they ate pasta every night to save money." The crowd was riveted. The Whitehall associates were looking at their shoes, at the sky, anywhere but at me. Senator Morrison was already edging toward his car. "But here's what Preston really thinks of all of you," I said, pulling out my phone. 2 days ago he called me. He told me he only wanted important people at his wedding. Said my immigrant friends wouldn't understand the language of real power. I connected my phone to the portable speaker system Clara had set up for the wedding music. Preston's face went completely white. "Vic, don't." His own voice, slick and condescending, suddenly filled the garden. "Look, I'm not trying to be offensive, but there's a difference between new money and, well, money that's been refined over generations." The recording played on. Every insult, every casual dismissal, every word that dripped with his sense of superiority echoed across the stunned silence. This marriage is Clara's chance to elevate herself, to become part of something bigger than where she came from. Margaret Whitehall's face was stone. Her son's voice had just condemned them all. I stopped the recording and looked at her. "You know, Mrs. Whitehall, your son was right about one thing. This marriage would have elevated my daughter. It would have elevated her from a life of honest success to the life of a criminal's accomplice." That's when Preston finally snapped. The last thread of his composure broke. "You sanctimonious bastard!" he roared, his face crimson. "You think you can destroy my family because we wouldn't accept your blue-collar friends?" He lunged toward me, shoving his own lawyer aside. He never made it. A calm, firm hand landed on his shoulder. A man in a dark suit, who had been standing quietly near the back, stepped forward. I'd called Agent Rodriguez an hour ago, suggested he might want to witness some of Preston's public statements. "Mr. Whitehall," Agent Rodriguez said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you're in violation of your bail conditions by approaching and threatening a witness in your case. You need to come with us." "This is harassment!" Preston shrieked as a second agent cuffed his hands behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent," Rodriguez said, leading the sputtering, defeated man away, "which you probably should have used about 10 minutes ago." As they led Preston away, a profound silence fell over the garden. The Whitehall contingent vanished like smoke, their expensive cars crunching on the gravel driveway as they fled the scene of their family's implosion. My people, however, my crew, my friends, they surrounded Clara. Not with questions, but with quiet, steady support. They had seen a battle fought and won, and they were there to honor their general. 3 months later, the final verdict landed, not with a bang, but with a quiet, satisfying thud. I was reading the front page of the Boston Globe in my office. Whitehall heir sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for elderly fraud scheme. The photo showed Preston, pale and gaunt, being led from the courthouse. He would serve at least 7 years. The Whitehall dynasty, 4 generations of Boston prominence, had ended not with a whimper, but with the clang of a prison gate. His mother, Margaret, had sold the Beacon Hill estate and moved to Florida, unable to face the shame. His father's law firm was hemorrhaging clients. Their name, once a symbol of Brahmin prestige, was now a synonym for disgrace. But justice wasn't just about the fall of the guilty. It was about lifting up the innocent. The week after the arrest, David Chen and I had sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole mess had started and structured the Morgan Construction Victims Assistance Fund. We couldn't give the 12 families back their trust, but we could help rebuild their security. We covered every dollar they had lost, and then some. The first check went to the Chens, to ensure their grandson's college dream would still come true. The most profound change, however, was in Clara. She had quit her marketing job the Monday after the confrontation. For weeks, she was quiet, reflective. I gave her space, trusting she would find her own way forward. One morning, she walked into my office at Morgan Construction. She wasn't dressed for an interview, but she had a look of purpose in her eyes I hadn't seen since her college graduation. "Dad," she said, her voice firm, "I want to come work for the company. Not in marketing, not in finance. I want to build things." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Clara, you have a business degree from one of the best schools in the country. You could work anywhere." "I want to work somewhere I'm proud of," she replied. "I want to be a part of a legacy that's measured in community, not just in profit." I gave her a small office at first, and a title that we made up on the spot, Director of Community Development. I thought she'd spend a few months finding her feet. Instead, she threw herself into the work with a passion that stunned me. She spent weeks meeting with city planners, nonprofits, and the very communities that men like Preston Whitehall only ever flew over. And she was about to find her first project. Clara unrolled a set of blueprints across the big table in the conference room. It was a design for a beautiful, modern building, not a luxury high-rise, but a multi-story senior living center, complete with gardens, a community hall, and accessible apartments. "I've been talking to the city about that plot of land we own over in Dorchester," she said, her finger tracing the outline of the building. "It's an underserved community. The seniors there, many of them, immigrants, they have nowhere to go. We can build this for them, high quality, affordable, and safe." She pointed to the elegant script at the top of the blueprint. It read, "The Margaret Hoffman Community Residence." I looked at the name of the 82-year-old woman Preston had robbed, the woman whose life savings had been the first domino to fall in this whole ugly saga. Clara had transformed an act of cruel theft into a foundation for an act of profound kindness. In that moment, I had never been prouder. "It's a perfect idea, Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Let's build it." Her life was rebuilding, too. Last week, she had brought a young man home for dinner. His name was Leo, and he was David Chen's son. He was a public defender, a smart, compassionate man who spent his days fighting for the very kind of people Preston Whitehall would have dismissed as unimportant. Watching them talk and laugh in my kitchen, I knew my daughter was finally with a man who understood the value of building things, not just for profit, but for people. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's not about tearing something down. It's about what you choose to build in its place. We had taken the rubble of Preston's lies and his greed, and from it, We were building a home for the vulnerable, a future for my daughter, and a new chapter for our family. I find myself thinking about Preston's words from that first night. He spoke of class, of legacy, of generations of refinement. He believed legacy was a thing you inherited, a birthright passed down like silverware. But he was wrong. A true legacy isn't in your name, it's in your actions. It's etched in the concrete you pour, the trust you earn, and the lives you touch. It's built, one honest day at a time, one promise kept, one relationship honored. The important people, the truly important ones, understand that. The rest, we learned, never really mattered anyway. It's a funny thing, the world we live in. Some people spend their whole lives chasing a legacy, thinking it's something you can buy or inherit, like an old house on Beacon Hill. They collect titles and connections, believing that's where real power lies. But what I've learned over a lifetime of working with my hands is that a real legacy isn't something you're given. It's something you build. It's in the call you answer at dawn and the handshake you honor at dusk. It's in the quiet loyalty of old friends and the pride you see in your children's eyes. That's a foundation no amount of money can buy and no scandal can ever shake. Watching my daughter find her way back to those values was the most important project of my life. The journey was painful, filled with moments of fear and doubt, but seeing her transform that pain into a passion for helping others, that's a reward greater than any contract I've ever won. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest structures are the ones we have to break down and build back up again, stronger than before. If this story of what it truly means to build a family and a legacy resonated with you, we'd be honored if you'd share your own thoughts in the comments below. What does the word legacy mean to you? And please, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Thank you for listening.